You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Did you know that the average deer hunter in Mississippi last year took about 1.5 deer per hunter? And that hunters can actually lead the conservation effort in Mississippi this year by taking more deer. Well, we're going to learn about that and more with Deer Program Coordinator William McKinley on today's show.
This episode of the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast is brought to you by the Foundation for Mississippi Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Deer hunting, the sport of deer hunting, kind of a big deal in the state of Mississippi. And the coordinator of the deer program here at MDWFP is a man named William McKinley with us here today in the studio. William, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too. And we have to cover this first.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of people just heard me say your name, William McKinley, and they're like, that name rings a bell.
They've heard it, haven't they?
It might be because the 25th president of the United States was named William McKinley.
He was. And
you familiar with him?
According to my grandfather back in the day, he showed me a family tree, and he was a third grade uncle of mine. So never met him. Distant states, of course, well before my time. But yes, can stay. And let me state out loud, I have zero political aspiration, okay? I am a wildlife biologist. I do not, I respect politicians. I don't want to be one.
So the name runs in the family, maybe not the desire to run for office.
That's right. That's right.
And I guess so too, because you've been here at MDWFP for well over 2 decades now.
23 years last week.
23 years last week.
Yeah.
Well,
no more way around a little bit.
No, and 21 years as the coordinator of the deer program.
In the deer program in some way. So as a deer program leader, as for a handful of years there, I was the enclosure program. I was the regulatory agent for the agency over the high fence enclosures. And then in 17, transferred over to the deer program coordinator and have been doing that ever since. And man, deer are my passion.
Well, okay, this to me, it almost feels like a dumb question to ask this. Deer program, well, we know it's deer hunting and managing that wildlife and that resource here in Mississippi. But as the coordinator of the deer program, what do you do? And I know that's hard to answer in a few seconds.
Well, I've been asked that a lot, and I had to figure out how to answer that. And it's data.
Okay.
It is data. If I answered my job, it is data collection, whether that be from deer that DMAP clubs out there are harvesting or whether it be from survey numbers. It's taking that data, it's analyzing that data, it's summing up those results and providing recommendations to policymakers, to hunters, to land managers, and all across the board. But I'm data-driven in what we do in the deer program.
Statewide. You mentioned you were in, I think, Tupelo yesterday. You've been all over, spend time on the coast. You're putting the miles in too.
I do. I drive quite a bit, and people ask me where my office is, and I say primarily in that truck. So
that's right. Okay, so how'd you get in that position? 23 years ago, you wound up at here at MDWFP. You've been here ever since. What led you to this line of work?
So we got it back all the way up to when I was a little boy. Dad took me hunting, and he took me hunting a lot. My dad was young, and I was born to fairly young parents, and that led to he wanted somebody to go, and I think I cried when he didn't take me. So he would drag me along and to dove fields when I was 4 years old with a cocked BB gun to go out and dispatch a dove that he had winged, to catching the tail end of the quail. And he had bird dogs, and my granddad had bird dogs, and we did a lot of quail hunting. We were right at the tail end of that, right as the decline was really happening there, and the quail were disappearing, but could still find a lot of coveys. So I remember that as a kid. Squirrel hunting, man, that's still one of my passions. But people are like, what did the deer coordinator do opening day of deer season? Well, last week I was shooting squirrels opening day. Killed a limit by 8:35 October 1 morning. It was great. So a lot of squirrels out there this year, by the way.
Yeah.
So, but as I moved through, my dad kept me involved. He kept me in the woods. I remember a conversation that he had when I was in high school, and he told me he had this with my mom at one point and said we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, we didn't. We grew up, and Dad, they worked hard to make ends meet and get clothes for me for school and such. And but he always bought me some type of hunting equipment, a new gun, a .22, something. And he said he got into an argument with my mom one time. And she said, we just don't have the money to do this year. And he said, look, I would rather have him in the woods than out on the street somewhere. So we're going to, if we have to borrow the money to do this, we're going to get him something. And, well, I would say that was the catalyst. So, and I always had that passion for learning about wildlife. And, when I was in high school, I had no idea you could do this for a living, Matt. I didn't know what a wildlife biologist was, man. Growing up in Winston County and out in the country, and I got a sister, but she was 7 years younger, so I was pretty well by myself, during those first years, and running around with a BB gun, and no bird was safe.
I bet.
Statute of limitations off of that.
Right, sure. That's long enough ago.
That's right.
And you get into high school. When did your eyes sort of get open to, what? They're we would say back then game wardens, but they're conservation officers, people who work for the state, and this is what they do for a living. When were your eyes open to that? You realize this could be a career for you?
I was in college. High school, I took a class called Diversified Technology, and I thought I wanted to be an engineer. And I went to school for engineering for 2 years. I had scholarships to go to engineering, and I pursued that, and I kind of come across one of those epic moments in life where you're sitting there going, what am I doing here? Yeah. Am I just trying to do this just to make money so I can buy land to go enjoy it and hunt on? Which nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
But I'm like, I want to pursue a job where I will be outside, and I want to pursue this. And I remember that day going back. I left Fortran 77 class. It's a vivid picture here, man. I'm sitting there. It's a spring day and a spring semester. I'm at MSU, and I'm like, I just don't belong right here. I just don't. And I come to that conclusion. Of course, I wasted 2 years of money.
Well, maybe not.
I had 1 year. So it set me back. It set me back 1 year in getting my degree. But I went home, went back to my apartment at State, called my parents and said, hey, I got to change my major. They said, well, you also got to work. Because I was working as an engineer in training already at a company. And I said, well, all right. So many people may recognize the name of Dr. Harry Jacobson. Dr. Jacobson was the deer professor at Mississippi State University, world-renowned deer researcher. I left there that next day, walked into his office, never met the man before, introduced myself, told him I was changing my major to forestry with a wildlife option, would start the next semester, and I need a job. I can get on work study. I don't care if you let me sweep the floors in this building. I have got to make enough money to pay my light bill in my apartment. And 3 weeks later, I was trapping bears on White River National Refuge, Arkansas.
Well, what's the connection there? How'd that work?
At that point, I just wanted to be forestry with a wildlife option. This was even, to date me, that'll take you back to before there was a wildlife major at MSU in undergrad. Okay. So the route was to become a forester, to get a forestry degree, and do the wildlife option of the forestry degree. So they asked me, I ended up interviewing, and for the position, they were about to hire somebody, a technician, to go with grad students over to Big Island, Montgomery Island, and White River National Refuge to trap bears as part of a research project that MSU had going. And I just happened to walk in that door and shake his hand and tell him who I was at the moment they were needing somebody. Talk about fate, talk about chance, talk about an overall plan there for my life, and I had no idea of. But I was trapping bears, and I had never seen a bear. Except at the zoo.
From having never seen one to trapping them in 3 weeks.
So we're launching a little boat over in Bolivar County at Rosedale, and we're going across the river over to Big Island, and we're going over to Montgomery Island, and we're setting bear snares and dealing with rotten, stinky fish as bait in the middle of summer. And my first bear I really got to lay eyes on was caught by his foot in one of our snares, popping his teeth at me, and at a few feet, and that was intimidating.
Okay, and that had to be one of those, okay, do you really want to do this moments?
It was.
For you.
Yeah, and I was loving every minute of it.
Okay,
So,
well then there was your answer, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. If you were loving every minute of it, stinky fish bait, catching bears, there's one in a trap, and you were loving every minute of it.
It was great.
You knew you'd made the right decision.
I did, and so from there, finishing a degree in forestry at MSU, and getting to know all the professors there quite well, because I volunteered for a lot of work while I was there. I helped on predator projects, turkey projects, quail projects, veg projects. They were the worst. You go out in the summer and clip veg out of plots and poke it in bags, and just hot, sweaty, and ticks. Yeah. But did a lot of that, helped with some deer projects, continued some of the bear work during then. Actually got a chance to help catch one of the first black bears caught in Mississippi in just decades. We were over north of Greenville, and this bear had been moving down the Delta. We had got reports of him all the way up at Cleveland. A farmer had seen him going across the field. We went there and hung bear bait, just pastries and stuff and sardines in bags, and he didn't hit it. And then we get a report, and he's 25 miles south. Well, we ended up following him till he hit some beehives, and he started hanging around, and we put a culvert trap out and caught him. We put some electric fence around the beehives. He got shocked, walked over and ate the honey bun. So, and but man, when we got there that morning, that's still a picture too, because that bear was in the trap. So I had already trapped a few over at White River, and on Big Island in Arkansas. But when we got there, the farmer had already seen we had caught him. And, man, I thought it was half of Greenville. It was people. I'm just doing crowd control, getting them back.
Is that right?
And, hey, here's a funny story on that bear. We put a telemetry collar on him. This was before GPS collars. We kept up with him for about 3 days, and he disappeared. Well, we were all over the Greenville news and, oh, man, I hope nobody's done anything to that bear. So we're like, well, where'd he go? And we couldn't find him. We rode up and down the levee. We drove all over. 21 days to the day later, he's run over in Tallulah on I-20.
Hit by a car. Mm-hmm. Good. In Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. He was 101 map miles from where we caught him. And crossed the river at flood stage.
Swam.
Well, he didn't walk across the bridge. I think we'd have got a report, but he was run over on the interstate in Tallulah. They call and hey, we got this bear over here with a collar, and we're like, what? Well, no wonder we couldn't find him, because our telemetry would pick him up 5 miles.
Yeah, he was 100 miles away.
He was 101 straight line miles away.
It's interesting to hear you tell these bear stories. I was walking in today, Ballard here, in the building. I was walking by and said, hey, and I'm sitting here thinking, maybe you missed your calling, William. Maybe it was bears and not deer after all these.
No, when I moved over into the deer program, then so along that same time that I was doing the bear trapping at MSU, they had me working at the MSU deer pens. Okay. So they'd send me out for 10 days to bear trap, and then it might be 2 or 3 weeks. Well, during that time, I still needed to work, so that I was working at the MSU deer pens. Okay. And loving every minute of that. So I loved both, don't get me wrong, but deer were the passion, and I'm avid deer hunter, still am. Venison is the meat on my table. My daughter's now 17, and I take her hunting regularly. And
Really?
She loves to hunt. And
when did she start hunting with you?
So I started taking her when she was about 5.
Wow.
Now, she wasn't actually hunting then, but we were, you go to a box stand, you get a little exposure there, take a little bit of other things to do. And I remember my first couple of times I intentionally did not shoot a deer in front of her. Mm-hmm. I remember the first time I shot a deer in front of her, little blue-eyed blonde, and I shot a deer with my muzzle loader, a doe, and granted, killing something can be kind of messy sometimes. And this deer bled more than the average deer. Well, we go out there. She sees me shoot the deer from the box stand. She sees the deer run toward the stand and collapse. All that's fine. And we go out there, and she's looking at it, hands on her hips, 3 foot tall. She said, "Is it going to wake up?" I said, "No, darling, it's dead." That's how we. Well, I said, "Now we're going to take it back and we're going to clean it." No. I thought, boy, this is going south, Matt.
Yeah.
I said, so this is that first introduction, to death that she had seen. And I'm like, well, I said, well, let's go back to the shed. And let's let it ride on the buggy with us. So I put it on the little golf cart we'd rode down, and we go back up to the shed, and I'm still thinking, it's kind of a defining moment. She has seen the process here, and I start dressing the deer there at the skinning shed at that camp. And I pulled the back strap out of the deer. Well, she had seen me do that at home. She had seen that portion, and her eyes suddenly made recognition, and she said, "That's deer meat." And I said, "And this is how we have to get it. This is the way we get it." And she stuck her hand. I still got a picture of her with her, 8 size too big blue gloves on and holding a back strap. And from that, she started going with me. She waterfowl hunts with me. She dove hunts with me and deer hunts. And she's taken several deer. And we've had some great, great hunts together now. So
isn't that what it's really all about, ultimately?
So it is. And then, I like to do my own processing. Nothing against deer processors whatsoever. It's just me personally. I know when I harvest that deer, I cut it certain ways. I do what I want to do, and then I wrap it, and then I label that deer. That deer is specifically labeled, and when we sit down to supper, I'll tell her, this is the deer that you harvested when we were in Knoxville County this year. And, that's we did that this past week. I was like, "This is part of yours." The one you harvested, she got 2 does this past season. So anyway, fun stuff, really man.
Cool. Yeah. So here in Mississippi, as the deer program coordinator, you've got a unique, inside, intimate look at year to year what the state is in terms of population and that deer population. This year, right now, where we are, 2024, where is it?
So it's high.
Okay.
We recently ran our numbers in a method called population reconstruction. And credit, we got some great staff members. So I'm talking like I'm doing all of this, but I'm not. It's a lot of our staff members like Pierce Young and Caven Campbell and some of these other guys are running some of these numbers. Well, Pierce ran these numbers, and the data's showing we have a record high deer population. And if you look at the number of deer complaints from deer damage we're getting from cities, from farmers, from drivers, that goes along with that. Now, if I say that, somebody's listening going, "Well, I'm not seeing more deer on my place." And we realize it's site specific. But as a whole, it appears that the state has more deer. And we've done those that came before me have done such a great job at building this herd up. I mean, if you want a success story, look at deer restoration efforts in this state. From 1,200 deer to our numbers are now at 1.6 million.
Wow.
1,200 deer just 80, 90, 100 years ago. Yeah. And now we're harvesting over 300,000 deer a year. Yeah. It's amazing how many deer we have out there now. So.
And so record number this year, what does that mean for, the individual hunter in terms of the numbers that I do harvest or that I should harvest during the year? What does it mean?
So we do a survey we've been doing for decades now to determine how many deer are harvested and how many deer are harvested per hunter. Well, the average hunter in the state's harvesting 1.6 deer a year.
Okay.
If you back up about 10 to 12 years ago, they were harvesting about 2.2 to 2.3 deer a year. So even though we have more deer, and by the way, our hunter numbers are holding strong. We're bucking the national trend on hunter numbers, on deer hunter numbers. National trend says hunter numbers declining. Mississippi we're holding our own on that. And I applaud those hunters out there because they're teaching other people to hunt. And that's why our hunter numbers are staying constant. But we've kind of reached that point where it's almost too much of a good thing. We don't want to bring this deer herd down a lot, but we need to stabilize its growth. Bringing it down just a little to back where the numbers were just, a few years ago would be helpful. So we are making a push out there, encouraging hunters that if they're not reaching their bag limit, and the average hunter is only harvesting, 1.6, we're asking them to, try to harvest another deer this year. Not asking them to do anything illegal. Not if they're harvesting the bag limit, great. But if they're that average shooting 1 or 2 deer, maybe you add 1 more deer to your bag to help us overall get this deer herd under control.
And the word or phrase you just used was to help us, meaning, am I right? Another way to word that would be, as an individual hunter, if you're not hitting that bag limit, the hunter is actually leading the conservation effort, protecting the numbers, protecting the population long term by making that decision. I'm going to do my part, and I am going to take 1 more deer this year. So the hunter himself, herself, is actually on the forefront.
They are the deer herd managers.
They are the managers.
They are the managers. I give advice. We just give the advice. We love to say that we manage deer herds. I don't. I give hunters advice on how to manage deer herds. I manage a deer herd when I go sit in the deer stand, which I love to do. Probably not going to mention I missed one day before yesterday, so I just keep that quiet. But anyway,
Chip can edit it out or not. It's up to Chip.
That arrow just went right under. Anyway, so it's a difference in 20 and 26 yards, by the way. Yeah. Anyway, deer hunters are our managers, and we applaud them because they've stepped up to the plate over these years. We got, Mississippi's a deer hunting destination now. People across the country are looking at our state as, hey, we would like to come there and go hunt. We have so many older, mature bucks. We're growing some fantastic antlers. The opportunity for harvesting a deer is great, whether you're hunting public or private land in this state. And we have huge variation in what we offer. You look at the rut in the state. People say, well, I'm going to go hunt when the rut is. And I'm like, well, you got to tell me where you're going. People call from out of state because literally we have deer rutting the breeding season because of some restocking efforts over the years and such. But we got deer in northwest Mississippi that the peak of rut is the first week of December, and deer in southeast Mississippi, the peak of rut's the last week of January.
Yeah.
So you could literally hunt the rut in this state for 2 solid months.
Yeah. That's and that's not the case everywhere else.
No, it's not.
And I go back to the numbers too, again, that you mentioned a little bit ago. I was just kind of rehearsing them in my head, but you said about 10 years ago, the average per hunter, as far as numbers of deer taken, was over 2. Okay. And now 10 years after that, average is 1.5 or 1.6 per hunter, while the population of deer has gone up during that time.
That's right. So what that tells me, as I look at the numbers, hunters are choosing to shoot fewer deer.
Yeah.
And a variation of reasons out there, whether it be freezer space, whether it be time, whether it be all the different constraints that happen in a busy life. But hunters are choosing to harvest fewer deer. And I'm as guilty as anybody. I mean, if I know an area may need a few more does taken off, and you're sitting there and it's right at dark, and you think, but I harvest my fair share of them, and we are asking hunters to step up and take just a few more if they have abundant deer populations on their properties. And like I said, this is site specific. I'm not asking the guy a guy or gal that's just seeing a few deer out there to try to go harvest the few they're seeing. But in most of the state, the deer herd is quite abundant. I go back to growing up, Winston County, it was very few deer behind my house. I had a lot of area to hunt and very, very few deer to hunt. I mean, I'd find a deer track in junior high and sit where that deer crossed that one woods road for 3 afternoons, hoping it would cross it again. And I mean, it was very few deer back there. Mm-hmm. And now we can't keep them out of the garden. Yeah. So they have expanded over that time, and that's a good problem to have, but it is a problem.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's maybe my next question as I'm thinking, the position you're in, mm-hmm. as coordinator of the deer program, the state agency, MDWFP, has done an incredible job in the state. You're managing it. You went over the 100-year history just briefly. What is the bridge to cross between you and your message and getting that message and the understanding of that message in the hands of the individual hunter? Not only doing this podcast, but communicating that to the public. How do you cross that bridge?
Well, I will say that one of our biggest assets with our agency is the grassroots movement of us, and our people are personable. Our staff are personable. They go out and people know I'll say conservation officer, but everybody in the field is going to call him a game warden. They know their game warden. They know him. Our biologists are doing site visits out there. They're going on people's properties. And, I did a bunch of those early in my career. And one of my favorite things, going on to other people's property with them at their request and showing them things that they've looked at and never seen. Look where a deer bit this. Look at what they're doing here. But getting that message out, it's a grassroots. We're telling people we have started a campaign where we're trying to educate people called More Than a Hunt. And we're doing things like encouraging people to donate more venison. If your reason for not harvesting one more deer is you don't know what you're going to do with it, well, let us help you try to find some ways to get that deer donated. Matt, how important is venison to this state?
It's huge.
279,000 deer harvested by licensed hunters, because our surveys licensed hunters. So exempt hunters, they're killing a lot more. That's why earlier I said over 300,000. We don't know that hard number, but let's just take that 279,000 and look at the amount of venison. We're looking at close to 10 million pounds of venison in the state.
Wow.
How important is that as a food source for our entire state? So
sure.
It's such an important resource. It is so much money generated through hunting and fishing and wildlife viewing, but deer are a huge component of that wildlife generated money too. Yeah. So deer are incredibly important to our state.
Yeah. Okay. And that individual, I'm kind of taking it back down to the individual level. So if someone's listening to our conversation in their truck as they drive up the highway, the average has most recently been 1.6 deer per season per hunter. Ideally, if you were to be back here same time next year and said, we just had an ideal number, what would that be? Would it be over 2? Would it be 2.5, 2.6?
It would be 2.5.
Okay, so
it would add one more deer per person is what looking at the numbers. So if we look at big picture numbers, I got an idea of the population. And then I have a good estimate of how many deer hunters are harvesting. Let's look at that as a percent of the population harvested. Looking back over time for the past several decades, if we harvest 21 to 22% of the total population, the population stays level.
Okay.
If we harvest over 22, 23, 24, we see slight decrease. It'll be just a 2 or 3% decrease in the overall population. If we harvest less than that, in the teens as a percent, we see the population inch upward. Well, our total percent of the population harvested for the past few years has been down around 16%.
Okay.
That means that we're getting growth and we're not keeping up with harvest on that growth. So getting up to 2.5 deer per hunter would get us at that stabilize to slightly decrease overall population. That's my goal. And I can get this herd a little bit more under control. And hey, that means that there's more food to eat. That means that antlers get bigger. It means that we have more reproduction on the does out there. So it's a good thing.
Right. And I know this sounds like I'm picking on you. I'm not. Just don't miss at 26 yards.
I will redeem myself.
You brought it up, so I had. He said, "I will redeem myself."
I will redeem myself,
and I know you will. That's great, William. It's great to talk to you. First time on this podcast, anyway. And I know you're no stranger to microphones and talking about this, and we'll do it again soon. But it's a real pleasure to meet you, get to know your story a little bit, and learn about, from your perspective, what we as individual hunters can do to help, and hopefully it goes well this year.
Very good. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you. He is William McKinley, the coordinator of the deer program here at Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Thanks for listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast, and we'll see you outdoors.